I found her name on the buzzer panel before I ever heard her laugh. That probably sounds worse than it was. I wasn't trying to be strange about it. I'd just moved into the building in October. One of those older, low-rise places on Elgin Street in Ottawa, 4 floors, 12 units, radiators that clanked every night at around 2 in the morning, like someone was walking through the walls. My unit was 3B. Hers was 3C, directly across the hall. The buzzer panel in the lobby listed every unit by last name only. Most of them were faded or peeling. Hers was the only one written in actual pen, in neat handwriting. Whitmore, 3C. I don't know why I noticed. I just did. I didn't meet her for 3 weeks after that. I heard her, though. Not in a weird way. The walls were thin enough that I could tell she kept odd hours. That she had a cat who apparently dragged things across hardwood floors at midnight. And that she laughed at something on her phone every couple of nights, at a volume that suggested she had no idea anyone could hear her. It was a good laugh. That's all I'm saying. The first time I actually saw her was a Tuesday morning in November. I was heading out early for a site visit. I do civil infrastructure work, mostly municipal drainage and roads, which sounds as unglamorous as it is, and I was standing in the hall waiting for the elevator with a coffee thermos under my arm and my jacket half-zipped because I'd run out of time. The elevator doors opened and she was already in it. She had paint on her left hand, not like a smear, actual full streaks of blue and white up to her wrist, like she'd been using her hand as a palette. She was carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder with what looked like a baguette sticking out the top, and she was reading something on her phone, and she didn't look up when I got in. I pressed LL was already lit. We rode down in silence. When the doors opened, she went left and I went right. And that was it. I thought about her the whole drive to work. Not in an obsessive way. More in the way you think about an interesting sentence you read somewhere and can't quite place. The next time was about a week later. I got home around 6:30 and found her crouched in the hallway outside her door, going through a grocery bag that had split at the bottom. There were oranges rolling in 3 different directions. A carton of oat milk had landed against the baseboard. A box of pasta had somehow made it nearly to the stairwell. I didn't think about it. I just put my bag down and started picking things up. "Oh God," she said. "You don't have to. It's fine. Seriously, I've got the pasta." She looked at me. I looked at her. She had blue eyes and a small scar near her left eyebrow that I would later find out was from a childhood incident involving a hockey skate and her older brother's general recklessness. At that specific moment, I just registered that she was looking at me like she was trying to figure out whether I was being genuine or performing kindness for some other purpose. I handed her the pasta. She took it. "I'm Rosie," she said. "Callum," I said, and then immediately regretted it because there was a half second where I couldn't tell if she'd heard me right. My name does that to people sometimes. "Callum," she repeated like she was testing it. "That's not a name you hear a lot. It's Scottish. My grandmother's thing. I like it," she said. She didn't say it like a compliment. She said it like a conclusion she'd arrived at honestly, which was somehow more meaningful. She got her door open with her elbow, and I handed over the last 2 oranges, and she said thank you and went inside. I went inside my own apartment, stood in my kitchen for a moment, and then put the kettle on for no particular reason. We started saying hello in the hall after that. Then we started stopping for a minute or two. Then, one Saturday afternoon in December, she knocked on my door because she was going to the farmer's market on Lansdowne and wanted to know if I needed anything, and I said no, and then stood there for a second, feeling like an idiot, and said, "Actually, wait, do they have good coffee there?" "The best in the city," she said. "Better than anything on this street." That's a strong claim. I stand behind it. So I went with her. We walked the 20 minutes there because neither of us had a car, and the bus felt like an unnecessary commitment for a Saturday morning. It was cold enough that our breath fogged in front of us, and she wore a red toque, pulled down low, and talked about the market like she'd been going every week for years, which she had. She knew the names of the vendors. The cheese guy, whose name was apparently Bernard, gave her an extra sample of aged cheddar, and she handed half of it to me without even thinking about it. "Do you do this every week?" I asked. "Almost," she said. "It's how I stay tethered." I didn't ask what she meant by that. I figured she'd either explain or she wouldn't. She did, eventually. But not that day. She was an artist, not in the starving romantic myth sense. She had a part-time position doing visual communications for a small environmental nonprofit in the glebe, and she painted on her own time, mostly landscapes. The blue paint I'd seen on her hand that first morning was from a piece she was working on of the Gatineau Hills in late autumn, which she showed me on her phone a few weeks later. It was good. Really good. I told her that, and she said, "You don't have to say that." And I said, "I know." And she looked at me with that same evaluating expression she'd used in the hallway with the groceries. She'd moved to Ottawa 4 years earlier from somewhere outside Fredericton. She had a cat named Governor who was enormous and deeply suspicious of everyone, including, it emerged, her. She did the Globe and Mail crossword every Sunday and was annoyed if anyone interrupted her before she finished it. She kept her fridge organized by category in a way that I found both impressive and slightly alarming. She had a brother in Vancouver she talked to every Sunday after the crossword, and their conversations apparently lasted anywhere from 8 minutes to 2 hours depending on what was going on in his life. I learned all of this slowly, across November and December, and into January, in the way you learn about someone when you see them in the hall and end up talking for 20 minutes. Or when you run into each other at the Loblaws on Bank Street and end up doing your shopping at the same pace without planning to. I also learned, somewhere in there, that she'd been in a long relationship that had ended about a year and a half before she and I met. She mentioned it once briefly, in the context of explaining why she'd moved to Ottawa in the first place. Her ex had been in Halifax, and she'd wanted distance, and Ottawa made sense for the job. She said it matter-of-factly, the way you talk about something you've finished processing. I had my own version of that story. Mine was a 3-year relationship that had ended about 2 years before I moved to Elgin Street. Her name was Amy. She'd been kind, and I'd been distracted, and we'd slowly grown into two people who were better as individuals than as a pair. And we'd figured that out about a year after we probably should have. I don't talk about it much because there's not really a story there, just a gradual uncoupling that was neither of our faults and still felt like something I was supposed to learn something from. I hadn't figured out what yet. January in Ottawa is a specific kind of cold, not a dry romantic cold, a wind off the river cold that gets inside your jacket and stays there. I started keeping my thermos full more out of necessity than preference. Rosie started leaving for work about 10 minutes after I did in the mornings, and sometimes we rode the elevator down together, and she had a wool coat in dark green that she said she'd found at Value Village for $12 and was unreasonably proud of. One morning in late January, the elevator was broken. I found this out when I pressed the button and nothing happened, and then Rosie came out of her apartment behind me and said, "It's been like this since yesterday. Did you call the super?" "Twice," she said. "He's looking into it." She made the air quotes with her fingers, so we took the stairs, 4 flights down. She went ahead of me and talked over her shoulder about a mural she was thinking about pitching to the nonprofit. Something for the front of their building, something to do with the river. And I said it sounded like a good idea. And she said she wasn't sure if she was being ambitious or naive about her own ability to pull it off. And I said those two things weren't mutually exclusive. She stopped on the second floor landing and looked back up at me. "Did you just say something genuinely useful?" "I have occasional moments." She laughed and kept walking. I want to be clear that by this point, I was well aware that I had feelings for her. I'd known for a while. It was not a mystery to me. I just hadn't done anything about it because I was, and I'm being honest here, scared. Not in a dramatic way. In the quiet way, where you have something good and you don't want to make it strange. We had a good thing in the hall and at the market and on the stairs. I didn't want to reach for something and ruin the thing I already had. So I kept being careful. February, she knocked on my door on a Friday night. She was holding a bottle of wine, a Niagara, on the Lake Riesling, which she later told me her brother had sent up for Christmas. And she said her friend was supposed to come over but had canceled. And she had the wine open already, and would I want to come have a glass because she wasn't going to drink alone. I said yes. Her apartment was the same layout as mine but completely different in character. She had bookshelves on every wall. The kitchen had a cork board covered in postcards and receipts and small sketches. Governor was in the corner on a chair, watching me with the particular suspicion of a cat, who has decided in advance not to be impressed. There were two of her paintings on the walls, the Gatineau Hills, one I'd seen on her phone, now finished, and one I hadn't seen, which was a smaller thing, just a figure in the rain near what looked like the Rideau Canal. It was lonelier than the Hills one. We sat on her couch and talked until midnight. I don't entirely remember the full path of the conversation. I remember that we talked about the building, the radiator clanking, the broken elevator, the guy on the second floor who played guitar at 7 in the morning. I remember that she told me about the mural pitch and that the nonprofit had been interested but wanted changes. I remember that at some point she told me about the end of her relationship in more detail than she had before. Not bitterly, but quietly, in the way you talk about something that still occasionally costs you something to remember. And I remember that I told her about Amy, which I almost never do. What went wrong, she asked. Not nosily, like she actually wanted to understand. Nothing specific, I said. We just stopped choosing each other, not dramatically, just slowly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think that might be the hardest kind. Why? Because there's nothing to be angry at, she said. So you just have to be sad. I didn't say anything for a moment. Governor had relocated from the chair to the arm of the couch nearest me and was now sitting there in an ambiguous way. Not quite close enough to be affectionate, but not quite far enough to be indifferent. Your cat is staring at me, I said. He does that, she said. He's deciding. Deciding what? Whether you're worth paying attention to, she said. He's very selective. And she looked at Governor. Governor looked at me. Then he stepped down onto the cushion beside me and sat. Apparently, Rosie said, you pass. We said goodnight at the door just past midnight. She leaned on the doorframe, and I stood in the hall, and for about 4 seconds nothing happened, and I thought very clearly, this is the moment where a braver version of me does something. Then I said goodnight and went back to my apartment. I stood in my kitchen again. The radiator clanked. I was so tired of being careful. The week after that was normal. We said hello in the hall. We texted once about whether the elevator was fixed yet. It wasn't. She sent me a photo of a sketch she was working on for the mural revision. I sent back a thumbs up, then deleted that, and sent an actual sentence about what I liked about it, because a thumbs up felt cowardly. On Thursday, she knocked on my door at around 8 in the evening. She was holding a piece of paper. She handed it to me. It was a note, handwritten, on a piece of her sketchbook paper in the same neat handwriting I'd seen on the buzzer panel in the lobby 4 months ago. It said, I keep waiting for you to say something. I'm tired of waiting. Do you want to get dinner? I read it twice. I looked up at her. She was watching me with an expression that was almost composed. Almost. Except for the small, specific tension in the way she was holding her shoulders that told me she was more nervous than she was letting on. I said, you could have just texted. She said, I wanted to be sure you read it. I said, when? She said, Saturday? I said, yeah, Saturday. She took a breath, and the tension in her shoulders dropped about 3 inches, and she nodded. She said, good. Like it was the end of a conversation she'd been rehearsing and was glad to have finally had. Then she went back into her apartment. I went back into mine. I stood in my kitchen. I didn't make tea. I just stood there and felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for longer than I'd admitted. Saturday was cold, the way February in Ottawa always is, which is to say, impolitely. We went to a place on Somerset she'd been wanting to try, small room, about 15 tables, the kind of place that prints the menu on a chalkboard and changes it depending on what the kitchen has. We got there early enough that we could hear each other without raising our voices. It was good. The food was good, but mostly it was good because she laughed at something I said about the drainage project I was working on. The least funny subject imaginable, and the laugh was the same one I'd heard through the wall back in October. Low and unguarded and real. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, she said, can I ask you something? I said, sure, she said. Why did you wait so long? I thought about it honestly before I answered. I didn't want to make things awkward, I said. We had something that was working. I didn't want to reach for more and lose what we already had. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I was doing the same thing. Being careful, she said, staying in what felt safe. She looked at her glass and then at me. I'm kind of sick of it. The being careful? Yeah, me too, I said. And I meant it. We walked home along the canal. It was dark, and the path lights reflected off the ice in long broken lines, and she'd looped her arm through mine somewhere around the National Arts Center and didn't unloop it. We walked slow, which neither of us acknowledged, because walking slow home at the end of a first date is a kind of agreement that you make without making it. At the door to our floor, she stopped. "I had a good time," she said. "Me too. I want to do it again." "When?" She thought about it. "Friday?" "Friday." She smiled, not a polished smile, a tired and happy one, the kind that happens when the thing you were anxious about turns out fine. She went into her apartment. I went into mine. Governor was sitting inside her door as it swung shut, and for one brief moment before the door closed, I swear he looked at me with something like approval. Maybe I'm projecting. A few weeks later, somewhere around the fifth or sixth dinner, she told me why she'd written the note instead of just texting. "If I texted," she said, "I could have panicked and deleted it before you saw it." "You would have deleted it?" "Maybe," she said. "Probably not. But the option would have been there, and it would have terrified me. So you removed the option." I removed the option. I thought about that. About the 4 months of elevator rides and market trips and wine on her couch, and all the moments where I'd thought about saying something and decided the timing wasn't right, or that it was too soon, or that I'd wait until I was more sure. About how being careful had mostly just meant being afraid in a more organized way. "I'm glad you wrote it," I said. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me in the hallway with the groceries that first night, evaluating, honest, like she was deciding whether something was worth saying. "I know," she said, and then, "You would have gotten there eventually. Would I?" "Yes," she said, with a certainty that was either generous or entirely accurate, and I still haven't decided which. "You would have. You just would have made us both wait longer." I didn't argue with that. Governor was on the chair in the corner. He was, as usual, watching. He closed his eyes slowly in the way cats do when they're at ease, which is either a sign of deep trust or complete indifference. And with him I had genuinely never been able to tell the difference. But I thought, looking at Rosie across the table, that I was done making either of us wait.